She was left to die, alone, starved, and forgotten in a frozen field. But when one woman looked into her broken eyes, she didn't see a lost cause. She saw a soul worth saving. This is the story of a horse who had every reason to give up, and the woman who refused to let her. A story of pain, patience, and the quiet power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. The forgotten field, where her silent cries were buried beneath the wind, and no one came. The field was not a place where things grew anymore. Once rich with wildflowers and the laughter of galloping hooves, it now lay barren, forgotten, like a memory that no one dared to revisit. The grass, long dead and grey, crunched under the weight of silence. And in the farthest corner, hidden behind a broken fence and a rusted gate, stood a skeletal figure that barely resembled a horse. Her name was Willow, though no one had spoken it in years. Her ribs jutted out like the frame of a house left unfinished. Her once glossy chestnut coat had faded into a dull, matted brown. Clinging to her fragile bones, her mane was tangled with thorns, her hooves cracked and bleeding, and her eyes, oh, her eyes, were oceans of sorrow that had forgotten how to weep. Each morning, the same cruel sun rose and poured light over the same empty sky. Willow would lift her head weakly, hoping for something, anything, to break the monotony of her suffering. Her world had shrunk to this desolate patch of earth, this forgotten field, where only crows kept her company. She didn't remember how long it had been since they'd stopped coming. The people, the food, the water. They had once fed her from gentle hands and laughed at her playful kicks. But then, the laughter stopped. The barn door closed one last time, and the pasture gate creaked shut forever. And she was left behind. Too old, too thin, too broken to be of use anymore. Days bled into nights, and seasons passed with merciless indifference. Rain came and washed over her like judgment. Snow came and buried her shivering body in a white, suffocating silence. And still, she stood, not out of strength, but because she no longer knew how to lie down and not wake again. But even in her suffering, she didn't give up. When the wind howled across the field, Willow would lean into it, ears flattened, eyes closed, not in fear, but in quiet defiance. When hunger clawed at her belly, she'd search for the smallest blade of grass, or a bit of bark to chew. She would not fall. Not yet. She remembered running once, truly running, when her legs were strong and her heart was full. The wind had been her friend then, not her tormentor. She would race through open meadows, her mane streaming like fire behind her, her hooves barely touching the ground. She had known freedom once. She had known love, and maybe, just maybe, that's why she still waited. Because somewhere, deep in her fading heart, a single ember of hope refused to go out. A memory, a whisper, a belief that someone would come, that someone would see her, that someone would remember. As the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, casting the field in long shadows, Willow stood alone, her head bowed and her body trembling, but her spirit unbroken. No one came that day, but tomorrow was another chance, and she would be waiting. Eyes that spoke of pain, a glance that shattered hearts, a soul begging for one last chance. It was a cold morning when Emily Carter drove down the winding country road with her windows half open, the crisp breeze stirring her thoughts. The world was quiet, still clinging to the final threads of winter. Emily had been volunteering with an animal rescue group for just over a year, long enough to see suffering, but not so long that it didn't still hurt. She had heard whispers about the old Miller property, a rundown farm long since abandoned after the owner's passing. Locals said there was nothing left there but rust and ruin. But someone, an anonymous caller, had left a shaky voicemail the night before. There's a horse, still out there, barely alive. Please. Something in that voice had struck Emily. So here she was, following a trail of nothing but instinct and the aching sense that she was already too late. When she turned the final bend and saw the field, her breath caught. Time seemed tossed and still. The gate was hanging crooked on rusted hinges, and the land beyond it looked like the aftermath of a war. But it wasn't the gate or the field that made her heart clench. It was the figure at the far end, standing utterly still, a horse, or the ghost of one. Willow raised her head slowly, her ears twitching at the sound of tires on gravel. Her legs wobbled beneath her, the effort of just existing draining every ounce of strength she had left. But her eyes met Emily's, across the distance, and in that moment the world tilted. Emily froze, her boots rooted to the earth, her hand trembling on the door handle. She had seen broken animals before, starving dogs, abandoned cats, but this was something else. Willow's eyes weren't just tired, they weren't just sad, they were screaming. Every lash of neglect, every cold night, every hungry day, every ounce of despair she had endured was there in that look. And yet, beneath it all, there was a flicker, a fragile, fading light, a plea. Please don't turn away. Emily stepped out of the car, slowly and cautiously, afraid even her footsteps might cause this fragile creature to collapse. Her heart pounded as she approached, the crunch of dead grass beneath her boots the only sound. When she was close enough to see the raw cracks in Willow's hooves and the sores along her spine, tears welled up in her eyes. Her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "Oh, sweetheart, what have they done to you?" Willow didn't move, didn't flinch, only watched. Watched like someone who had learned that kindness came with conditions, and that love was always temporary. But Emily didn't leave. She dropped to her knees in the brittle grass, reaching into her coat for the half-eaten apple she'd grabbed from her kitchen counter that morning. She held it out, palm open. Willow hesitated. Her nose twitched. Then with trembling steps, she inched forward, closer, closer, until her dry lips brushed Emily's hand. Emily exhaled shakily, overcome with emotion. "Good girl," she whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You're not alone anymore. I see you. I see you." And in Willow's eyes, those beautiful broken eyes, something shifted. It was faint, a flicker barely there, but it was real. Hope, for the first time in years, someone had looked at her and not turned away. Someone had seen her, not as a burden, not as a lost cause, but as a life worth saving. And somewhere deep inside her aching chest, Willow's heart beat just a little stronger. A stranger with gentle hands. When kindness arrived in muddy boots and trembling hope, the rescue was never simple. The process was rarely ever. Emily stood in the field for hours that day, never leaving Willow's side. She made the calls, first to the rescue team, then to the vet, then to her mentor at the sanctuary. Her voice shook with urgency, but her hand never left Willow's mane, gently stroking the tangled hair with a patience only love could teach. Willow didn't shy away. She was too weak to run, yes, but more than that, something in her recognized the truth in Emily's touch. This stranger didn't carry fear. She didn't smell of anger or impatience. Her presence was calm, warm, and slow. Not demanding, not taking, just being. By the time the rescue trailer arrived, the sun was sinking, low on the horizon, painting the sky with hues of fire and gold. 2 men and a woman climbed out, hauling equipment and hay, their faces lined with concern the moment they saw Willow. "My God," one of them muttered. "She's just bones." "Barely standing," said another. "We have to be careful too. Much movement could send her into shock." Emily nodded. "I know, we move slowly. We earn her trust, step by step." She had never led a rescue quite like this before, but something inside her had anchored itself to this horse. She couldn't walk away. She wouldn't. A sling was prepared, a gentle, padded harness that would support Willow's frail body during the move. It took nearly an hour just to get her to the gate. Every few feet, they stopped. Every movement was deliberate, every gesture calm and whispered. Emily walked just ahead of her, soft encouragement in her voice. "You're doing so good, girl. Just a little farther. I'm right here." She never stopped talking. Never let the silence creep back in. Willow astonishingly followed. She stumbled, yes, her legs trembling beneath her, but she didn't resist. She leaned into Emily's voice like it was a lullaby she once knew. When they finally reached the trailer, Willow hesitated. Her ears twitched and her eyes darted from the ramp to the strange, shadowy space inside. Her body shivered, and her muscles locked. Emily stepped closer, slowly, offering her palm again, not with food this time, but with presence. "I won't let anything happen to you," she whispered. "You're safe now." The mare stood still, eyes locked with Emily's, and then, tentatively, almost imperceptibly, she moved forward. It wasn't grace, it wasn't a strength, it was fate. When the ramp door finally closed behind her, and the trailer pulled away from the forgotten field, Emily remained behind for just a moment longer. He turned toward the open space Willow had once called home. The dead grass, the broken fence, the silence. A part of Willow would always remain there, scarred into the earth like a ghost that couldn't leave. But Emily had taken the living part with her, the part that still fought, still believed, still hoped. She climbed into her car and followed the trailer down the long road toward the sanctuary, her heart beating fast. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. The road ahead would be long and uncertain. But something had changed. Willow wasn't alone anymore. She had found her stranger with gentle hands. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of everything. Learning to trust again. Every step forward came with a memory of betrayal. The sanctuary sat nestled in a quiet valley, surrounded by trees that whispered in the wind and fields that rolled like green waves under the sky. It was a place of healing, not just for animals, but for the people who loved them back to life. For Willow, though, it felt like a dream she didn't yet trust. Her first few days were fragile. The vet had warned Emily that Willow's body was on the edge. Malnourished, dehydrated, and riddled with untreated infections, her system was frail. She would need slow feeding, warmth, and constant monitoring. Her recovery, if it came at all, would not be measured in days, but in weeks, even months. Emily stayed by her side. She slept in the stall next to Willow's, wrapped in a sleeping bag on a pile of straw, rising every few hours to check on her, feed her, and speak softly to her in the dark. It wasn't duty that drove her. It was something deeper, something maternal, sacred. A quiet understanding between two souls who had both been hurt in places no one could see. Trust didn't come easily. The first time Emily tried to brush Willow's coat, the mare flinched hard, nearly falling to her knees. Her entire body tensed, eyes wide with panic. Not pain, fear. As if she remembered all too clearly the hands that had once held cruelty instead of care. Emily froze. She dropped the brush. "It's okay," she said softly, kneeling down, hands open, voice steady. "You don't have to be afraid of me, not anymore." It was like speaking to a child, one who didn't yet believe in safety. So she started over. Each day, Emily sat beside Willow's stall, reading books aloud, humming old lullabies, or just telling stories about her life. She didn't touch her, didn't ask for anything. She was just there. And slowly, almost invisibly, the walls between them began to crack. One morning, Willow reached out and gently nuzzled the brush Emily held. Emily blinked. Her throat tightened. "Okay," she whispered. "We'll try again." The brush moved, in slow, gentle strokes across Willow's side. And this time, she didn't flinch. She closed her eyes. For the first time, it felt good. Every act of care became a small miracle. When Willow took her first steps out of the stall, it felt like watching a child take her first walk. Her legs were shaky, her pace cautious, but she did it. Emily watched, with tears in her eyes. "You're so brave," she murmured. "I'm proud of you." But there were setbacks too. Sometimes the sound of a gate slamming would make Willow freeze, her breath hitching, eyes wide in remembered terror. Once, when a male volunteer approached too quickly, she bucked and nearly injured herself trying to escape. Her past had left invisible bruises that throbbed when touched, even gently. Emily didn't rush her. Instead, she reminded her every day, "You're safe. No one will hurt you here, I promise." And slowly, Willow began to believe it. She began to whicker softly when Emily entered the barn. She took treats from her hand. She let herself be brushed, and even allowed a blanket to be draped over her thin frame on colder nights. More than anything, she began to look different. Her eyes, once hollow and dim, began to shine. Her coat, though still patchy, held the promise of the gleam it once had. Her legs steadied. Her spirit, though still cautious, had stopped trembling. She was healing, not just in body but in soul. Because love, when offered without conditions, has the power to undo years of pain, and Willow was learning, slowly, painfully, beautifully, that not all humans were cruel. Some came with soft voices and gentle hands. Some stayed, and some, like Emily, didn't ask her to forget the past. They simply promised her a future worth trusting in. Storms before the sunrise. The darkest nights she faced were the ones within her. Spring had come to the sanctuary in soft waves, fields turning green, blossoms beginning to bud, and the sweet scent of new life drifting on the wind. But for Willow, healing wasn't linear. Nature may have been moving forward, but some part of her still lived in the winter. Progress had been promising. She had gained weight, her coat had begun to shine again, and she even allowed the farrier to trim her hooves without fear. But trauma doesn't vanish just because time has passed. Sometimes the past fights back hardest when the future starts to look hopeful. It happened during a storm. The sky had darkened quickly that afternoon, and by nightfall, thunder rolled like a war drum over the hills. Rain pounded the barn roof like fists on a door, and lightning split the sky with violent brightness. Emily had stayed late, concerned about the older animals, especially Willow. She found her shaking in the corner of her stall, eyes wide, breath coming fast, each crack of thunder sending her deeper into panic. She wasn't in the barn anymore. She wasn't in the present. She was back there, back in the broken field, alone in the cold, rain slashing her skin, no roof, no warmth, no voice to soothe her. Every boom of thunder was a ghost, dragging her backward to a time when survival meant silence and stillness and fear.
"Shh, I'm here," Emily whispered, stepping inside the stall. But Willow didn't seem to hear her. She reared slightly, then collapsed onto her knees, heart racing. It was too much. Too much. Emily dropped beside her, wrapping her arms around her.
Horse's neck like a child might hug a stuffed animal for comfort. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she spoke into Willow's mane. "It's not then," she whispered. "It's now. You're not alone. You're safe. I'm right here, baby girl. I'm right here." And then she sang. A lullaby her mother used to sing to her when she was a frightened little girl. Her voice cracked under the pressure of emotion, but it didn't matter. It was soft, it was steady, and Willow somehow heard it. Her trembling slowed. Her breathing steadied. She leaned her heavy head into Emily's lap and closed her eyes, not out of exhaustion, but trust. Outside, the storm
raged.
But inside that stall, in the small circle of shared breath and broken hearts, there was peace. Emily stayed all night. By morning, the storm had passed, and sunlight poured through the barn windows in golden beams. Birds sang outside, and the earth smelled of renewal. Willow rose slowly, stretched, and turned to Emily with soft eyes that no longer looked haunted. She nuzzled her gently, her way of saying, "Thank you," not just for the night, but for every day Emily had stayed when others
had left, for every moment she hadn't rushed her,
for every kindness. Later that morning, Emily walked Willow into the field for the first time since her arrival. The grass was thick and green, the air warm. Willow hesitated at the gate, looking around as if unsure this world was real. And then, slowly, she stepped out. The sun bathed her fragile body in light, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she lifted her head, not in fear, but in quiet joy. She took one step, then another, then another. She walked through the grass like someone remembering how to live. Emily watched, hand over her heart, tears falling freely. This was not the end of the journey. Healing was not a destination, but a road with twists, with storms, with stumbles. But Willow had walked through the worst of it, and was still standing. She had faced the darkness. And now she was walking toward the sunrise. She never gave up. And in the end, the heart that was once broken became the strongest of all. Months passed. The scars on Willow's body faded, but those on her soul took longer. Some days were full of light. She would trot freely in the pasture, her tail swishing, eyes sparkling. On other days, the weight of her memories pulled her down, and she would stand quietly beneath the oak tree, staring into the distance as if searching for a version of herself that had never known pain. But there was one thing Willow never did, not once. She never stopped trying. She never gave up. Every day she made a choice to trust, to heal, to keep walking forward even when it was hard. And Emily, faithful as the morning sun, walked with her. Through every setback, every quiet triumph, every storm, and every sunrise. The sanctuary had begun to open again for visitors. Children came with wide eyes and sticky hands, learning about kindness and compassion. Volunteers offered their time and hearts. And among them, Willow became something unexpected, a symbol. The broken horse who once stood alone in a forgotten field was now the story that changed people. Emily placed a small sign on Willow's stall one afternoon, carved from wood and polished smooth. It read, "She never gave up." People would stop and read it, some brushing tears from their cheeks as they watched Willow nuzzle gently into Emily's shoulder. They didn't need to know her entire story to feel the weight of those 4 words. But there was one moment that truly marked how far Willow had come. It was the day of the sanctuary's annual Hope and Healing Day, a gentle celebration meant to honor their rescuers who had beaten the odds. Families gathered on hay bales, children laughed, stories were shared. Emily had been asked to speak. She stepped onto the small wooden stage in jeans and muddy boots, her voice shaking as she began. "I want to tell you about a horse," she said. "A horse who was left to die, forgotten in a field. A horse who had no reason to believe in love again. A horse who had every right to give up." She looked out at the crowd, her eyes brimming with tears. But she didn't. She waited. She hoped. And when someone came, she chose to trust. Even when it hurt, she chose to live. She turned and pointed toward the pasture behind her, where Willow now stood, strong, healthy, beautiful. Her coat gleamed in the sunlight. Her eyes, once hollow, now shone with depth and warmth. And as if she knew it was her moment, Willow lifted her head, letting out a soft, steady whinny that seemed to echo across the field. The crowd fell silent. And then came the applause. Tears, smiles, joy. Willow didn't understand the words or the clapping, but she felt it, the love, the energy, the belief. She walked calmly toward the fence, where Emily met her with open arms and gentle hands. "You did it," Emily whispered, pressing her forehead to Willow's. "You made it. You never gave up." In that moment, everything they had been through, the pain, the patience, the fear, the faith, merged into something larger than both of them. A story of survival. A story of love. A story of a horse who had every reason to let go, but chose to hold on. And so, in the field where she once struggled to stand, Willow now galloped freely, her mane catching the wind like fire, her hooves thundering on the earth, her spirit unbreakable. She was not a victim anymore. She was a survivor, and she would never, ever be forgotten.